Hello everyone, this is Madeline with SOJU BUJO and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new, this is a channel where I share ideas and inspiration for how to use bullet journaling to advance social justice goals. Today I'm sharing my March plan with me. This month I'm doing an herb garden theme because I always like to do a green theme for March, but also I thought this could be a subtle nod to International Women's Day, which is on March 8th. Now, of course, women are diverse in their qualities and their characteristics, so with this theme, I suppose I am particularly celebrating the many women who are nurturers, who feed the world, and who flavor the world. And this brings me to my monologue for the month, which I'll admit is a bit rambly. I was trying to think of a feminism-inspired quote for this month, and the first quote that came to my mind because I've heard it so often, was a quote that Madeleine Albright used to use frequently, which is, "There is a special place in hell for a woman who doesn't help other women." I actually have a fraught relationship with this quote, and a lot of people do. So this is a statement that Madeleine Albright used a lot throughout her life until, as some of you might remember, it got her into some hot water when she used it during the 2016 presidential primary when she was campaigning for Hillary Clinton against Bernie Sanders. She received a lot of backlash, critical of the sentiment in the quote during that campaign, and she ultimately apologized. But I want to look closer at that incident and use it to explore some ideas about the evolution of popular feminist movements throughout the years. So to start with some basic vocabulary and historical context, I'm not sure I'm the most qualified person to go over this since I've not necessarily studied the history of feminism or women's rights movements, but I'll give it a shot. The term patriarchy refers to a social system in which males hold primary political, social, economic, and spiritual power and control. So throughout history, feminist movements have attempted to reduce the patriarchal nature of human societies and establish more equality and equity across genders when it comes to access to power. Now, often the history of feminist movements is said to have started in the 19th century with what is called first wave or first generation feminism. But in actuality, the fight for women's empowerment has been a struggle many societies have been undertaking for centuries. That being said, historians and sociologists generally divide modern women's rights movements into three waves, starting with first wave feminism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, which focused heavily on overcoming political and legal barriers to equality for women, especially on voting rights and property rights. Second wave feminism refers to a movement some half a century later in the 1960s and 70s that focused more on overcoming social and economic barriers to gender equality, like social expectations or societal expectations of women to act a certain way or to serve a certain prescribed social function, and the impact that those expectations have on things like access to credit or fair wages. Third wave feminism refers to several branches of women's rights activism that began in the 1990s and continue through to today. So these modes of feminism are very diverse. They've branched out in a lot of different directions, so they're hard to categorize under one mantra. They include, the rise of intersectionality theory in response to the Anita Hill trial, movements to reclaim femininity and the words associated with it, deconstructing the gender binary and empowering gender nonconformity, and the Me Too movement that began as a movement to help young girls of color subjugated to sexual abuse, but has most notably been adopted by efforts to prosecute serial sex offenders in high-profile industries like film, journalism, and politics. What third-wave feminism movements have in common is that in one way or another, they seek to prioritize and highlight diversity and difference across women's experiences. Now, I give you all this context because as a woman growing up and living in America at the beginning of the 21st century, I have observed a lot of tension between women raised during and directly after the second wave feminist movement and women raised primarily during the third wave feminism movement like myself. And I think much of this tension is exemplified by the incident I described in the beginning regarding Madeleine Albright's statement and the backlash against it by millennial voters. So I want to unpack this a little and reflect on how we can maybe move forward together in a way that continues to reduce patriarchy and empower women. So historically, there has been a lack of diversity among the leaders of feminist movements, especially in the first and second generation feminism. Although many of these movements were inspired by and heavily relied on working class women of color, their leadership often consisted of upper class and upper middle class straight white Protestant women. In addition to this, or perhaps because of this, feminist movements have often faced fairly accurate criticisms that they do not prioritize the more disempowered among them, but instead have exploited and overlooked the most vulnerable women for the benefit of those who already have a fair amount of privilege. So, during first wave feminism, many suffragettes supported segregation and Jim Crow policies. Elite women's colleges have fought to keep black women out of their schools. And leaders in women's education have even expressed that they felt competition with people of color for civil rights, not in solidarity with them. While working women exploited during the Industrial Revolution spearheaded some of the first movements for women's rights, until recently, feminist movements have been far more focused on protecting a woman's right to work than protecting her right to be safe or unexploited in the workplace. And so, throughout history, feminist movements have at times perpetuated kind of a dominance narrative, a white supremacy narrative, a heteronormativity narrative, whether intentionally or just due to negligence. In the last 2 decades, though, this has become a real deal breaker for many women, especially women of color, but also queer women, poor women, even just privileged women who are unaccepting of the hypocrisy. And this context can explain some of the backlash against Madeleine Albright's quote in 2016 when she said during the campaign, "There is a special place in hell for a woman who does not support other women." She had said it before, it was a catchphrase of hers, but here, in the context of a high-stakes election in the early days of the Me Too and Black Lives Matter movements, it took on new significance. Because the truth is, women of privilege, particularly straight white women, especially financially stable straight white women, have often expressed sentiments that imply that we feel entitled to support from all women by virtue of our sex. Even the phrasing of the quote, there is a special place in hell, I guess it normalizes a particular worldview based in kind of Bible understanding, but it also capitalizes on the systematic use of intimidation, guilt, and shame to get others to do what you want them to do. And in a context of third wave feminism pushing back against previously discriminatory nature of past feminist movements, it's appropriate that this quote fell flat. Now, it would be easy then to dismiss the quote and say that it has no value to feminism or feminist movements, but I also think that would be a mistake. I went to an all-women's college, and I've engaged often with alumni and many women who grew up during second wave feminism who have told me how much Albright's mantra and sentiments meant to them, and I do think that it would not have become a mantra to one of the most powerful women in the world if it added no value. So what value does it add, and how can we salvage that value? Here we need to take a step back and do another history lesson and learn about the concept of divide and conquer, divide and rule. So this is actually a political concept where a ruling power that wants to stay in power and fears resistance and uprising from the people that they want to rule over divides them into subcategories, or more likely exaggerates subcategories that already exist, and pits those groups against each other. So this is a commonly used colonizing strategy, right? Spanish colonists did this in Central and South America with various indigenous nations there. English and Dutch and French colonists pitted North American and indigenous nations against each other. In Africa, French and British colonizers created apartheid systems based on ethnicity, dividing people you want to subjugate into distinct social categories and then making them compete with each other for power is a very tried and true way of maintaining power. Now, you might be asking, what does political science and international relations have to do with feminism in the United States? The truth is that this strategy is not only apparent in governments maintaining their power over territories, it is also apparent in the way that social societies work and with the way that humans interact with one another. So often in the US, people observe how different racial groups like Black Americans and Asian Americans often feel more in competition with one another for power, and ultimately this benefits white supremacy, even if white people aren't, actively trying to perpetuate the dynamic. Even within racial groups, the marginalization of a particular subgroup by sexuality or by gender. There's a great Intersectionality Matters podcast episode from last year that talks about the criticism Anita Hill, a Black American woman, received from many in the Black community in America when she accused Clarence Thomas of sexual harassment as he was being considered for the Supreme Court. Many in the Black community thought that she shouldn't be criticizing him and ruining his chances of being the first Black justice on the court. The founder of the Me Too movement, Tarana Burke, actually talks in her memoir about the pressure she felt within the Black activism community to diminish the traumatic experience of Black girls at the hand of Black men and boys for the greater good of the Black empowerment movements. So these are examples where patriarchy, right, intersects with the divide and rule logic, which gets us back to the issue at hand. Across American culture, and probably other cultures, but I'm familiar with the US, I've observed trends of women feeling like they are predominantly in competition with one another, and how this can keep us all in a state of greater disempowerment. So often this is portrayed in public media as like catfighting or women gossiping about one another, often in pursuit of a relationship with a man. I'll be honest, I see that dynamic of two women competing over a man much more often in media than I do in my actual life. What I do experience is women who seem proud that they don't get along with other women and have predominantly male friends. I've also seen women who stand up for their male partners and their interests at all costs, even when they might disadvantage female interests, including many women who advocate strongly for a boys will be boys mentality when it comes to anything from schoolyard bullying to sexual exploitation in the workplace. And it's in this context where I think we find the value in what Madeleine Albright was trying to say in her catchphrase. The society we live in is designed to make women feel as if we are each other's enemies rather than allies. And in that context, we have to work especially hard to support one another. We can't just assume that supporting each other is the default, because there is a lot out there, a lot of social forces that are fighting against us supporting each other. And that reality, it's important to be aware of. And I think this is where it gets interesting, because perhaps one of the starkest examples that I can think of when a woman did not stand up for another woman, but instead kind of succumbed to a divide and rule logic that led to the perpetuation of patriarchal norms, was how Hillary Clinton, as First Lady in the 1990s, responded to what turned out to be true allegations that her husband had had an affair with a young woman who worked at the White House, Monica Lewinsky. Despite that Monica Lewinsky was a young, vulnerable woman with strong professional aspirations in government service that were being absolutely quashed, Hillary Clinton was extremely disparaging and harmful in how she spoke about and allowed others to speak about Monica Lewinsky throughout the whole debacle. So in short, she was not very supportive of a fellow woman at all in that instance. Now, where does this leave us? I guess through all this reflection, I want to highlight 2 points. First, no woman is entitled to the support of other women simply because she's a woman. This is especially true for women whose overlapping social identities hold great access to power, like white women, straight women, wealthy women, non-disabled women, women with U.S. citizenship. Privileged women are not entitled to disempowered women's support just by virtue of our gender. But second, there is value to women giving other women the benefit of the doubt and actively combating the instinct instilled across centuries of divide and rule patriarchal logic to prefer the men and male perspectives in our lives over those of women. Women are not immune to those instincts. And so I might even argue that if you put these two things together, the real way forward is for women of privilege to stop asking what other women can do for us and start asking what we can do for them. So this may mean leaving the realm of women's rights behind altogether and venturing into the realms of combating homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, poverty, centering the experiences of women who have been on the margins of feminist movements throughout their history is, in my mind, the most feminist thing someone can do. And this leads me to my March monthly challenge. So in honor of International Women's Day, I challenge us all to choose one way in which we will support a woman or group of women who have less access to power than us. This could be reading or listening to someone's story. It could mean donating to a cause. It could mean talking with your grandmother about ageism or talking with your server at a restaurant about what it's like to make below minimum wage. It could mean buying from Black women-owned businesses or supporting Black Lives Matter, a movement that's led predominantly by Black women. Again, like always, there are many possibilities. And maybe you could even make a list of ideas in your bullet journal or track how the progress is going. But also, please share ideas down in the comments section below. Speaking of bullet journal, you can see as I've been rambling about the different waves of feminism, I have also been putting together my March plan with me with my herb garden themed spreads. And you'll see I've swapped out the quote for something with a similar sentiment but less baggage. It just says, "We rise by lifting others, we grow together." Then we have my calendar page and a space to write my goals for the month. Then we have my trackers, my habit tracker and my mood and energy trackers. And then finally, I've given you guys this month a glimpse into my pseudo-weekly spreads, which are really just weekend task and grocery lists. And that's it for this month. Thank you for listening. I will link all the books and other resources I highlighted in this video in the description box below. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to my channel if you want more social justice bullet journaling content. And if there is a social justice topic you would like me to explore in more depth, please let me know in the comment section below. And I'll see you next time.